Day one, baby.
Day one.
To this day.
To this day. To this day.
To this day.
Motherfucking me, we're covering today's top boxing news.
And now our continuation, recapping all this week's action. There was another super middleweight contest in the women's super middleweight division this weekend. The one we just saw involving what was then the unified champion, Franchon Crews, against what is now the unified super middleweight champion, Alejandra Jimenez. Alejandra Jimenez, who for a time was actually the WBC's women's heavyweight champion. Alejandra decided to come down in weight to pursue bigger names because, let's be honest, in the women's heavyweight division, it's a perpetual ghost town. You know, if you really want to be involved in big fights with big names, you're going to have to come down in weight.
That's what she did.
And that's what Alejandra did in hopes of eventually landing a Clarissa Shields fight, a fight we're going to have to talk about in another video. For now, let's recap this weekend's action. Well, I have to say that I'm not in agreement with the judges' scorecards. Myself, I would have taken a draw as opposed to Alejandra Jimenez winning a decision because I didn't see her win a decision. I saw her make Franchon very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I saw her make Franchon have to work for it. I saw her test Franchon's chin and her overall condition. But what I didn't see is Alejandra beat Franchon, because if you look at the punch stats for this thing, and I'm aware that fights are scored round by round, not punch by punch, so I get that. But when you look at the punch stats of this thing, they tell an element of the story that Franchon landed more punches. You think about that, and you think about the 4 key points that you use to score a round.
Yeah, no.
Effective aggression, clean punching, defense, and ring generalship. And I'd have to say that out of those 4 points, 3 of them would go to Franchon, and only 1 of them would go to Alejandra. And that would be ring generalship. That if this fight looks a certain way, if certain things are happening, it really is as a result of Alejandra being more in control of the fight than Franchon. But most everything else would have to go to Franchon. You talk about effective aggression, and what's more effective than landing more punches than the other girl?
Huh?
You talk about clean punching. I'd say that both Alejandra and Franchon got off some good, clean shots. I even saw Alejandra hurt Franchon at least 2 times. But the majority of clean punches, big right hands, big left hooks, they were coming from Franchon. So that would also have to go to Franchon. In the realm of defense, I don't think either of these girls showed much of it, but it was Franchon fighting off the back foot, walking Alejandra into punches, clean punches, and even though Alejandra took them well, she still took them.
Yeah.
These are scoring blows, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, having a chin is very useful. You know, having good punch resistance, it's very useful. Being able to take a hard shot. But that doesn't change that you took a very hard shot. It's a scoring blow.
That's what it is.
I don't recall the 4 key points of scoring a round being your ability to take a hard shot. I don't recall that. I don't recall that being one of the 4 points you use to score a round. And more often than not, Alejandra Jimenez was walking into punches. Granted that she was very formidable, very dangerous, very powerful. Her condition lasted from the 1st round to the 10th round. All very admirable qualities, characteristics, attributes that helped Alejandra make Franchon more uncomfortable than anyone else ever has. I mean, I get that, you know, it was a war, it was a fight, and it was competitive, that Alejandra made things difficult. But I'm not convinced that she actually won the fight by absorbing so many shots on the face.
Yeah.
I think that Franchon made things difficult for herself. She made things harder than they had to be. I have to communicate that much. That Franchon engaged Alejandra far too much, and that allowed Alejandra to have things her way.
To fight her fight.
Give off this aesthetic that she's in control of what's happening, even though she's absorbing more punishment than Franchon is.
She's getting hit more.
Franchon is not accustomed to a fighter walking into that many right hands from her and consistently coming forward. This caused Franchon to tire, to exert herself, to blow her load. Her condition began to fade. I mean, I'd say after the 3rd or the 4th, you could see that Franchon was getting tired. The blistering pace that this fight was fought.
It took a toll.
So I do have to communicate that Franchon did make things harder on herself by engaging the aggressor in their aggression rather than resorting to her amateur background. Stick to your boxing. Because that's the one thing you got on this girl. This girl's naturally bigger than you are, probably hits harder than you, seems to take a better punch than you do, but what you've got on her is you're the better boxer. So use it. And Franchon didn't. I think Franchon could have made her work cleaner in the eyes of the judges had she remembered you got 2 arms and 2 legs and you need to use both of them to make it a clear victory, whereas every time Alejandra marched forward looking for an exchange, Franchon obliged her.
She opened up.
Hooking off and trying to string together punches, combinations. This afforded Alejandra the opportunity to nail her between the punches when they're trading, as opposed to shortening them up and being judicious with your shots.
Pick your battles.
Maybe you don't throw a 3 or 4 punch combination. Maybe you land your 2 punches and you get the fuck out of there. Keep it clean. Keep it neat. This kind of efficiency would have allowed Franchon to continue to land scoring blows, yes, but not burn out as a result of throwing too much. I mean, you're hitting this girl with everything but the kitchen sink, and she hasn't stopped coming yet. You haven't got her respect, so you've got to make an adjustment. Yet another pitfall that I think made things harder for Franchon than they needed to be was that Franchon didn't target Alejandra's body, even though Alejandra is the much taller fighter. You know, these statuesque fighters, it's that much easier for you to go to their midsection because they're so much taller than you are. You're the fighter with the lower center of gravity. You can get lower than they can in the levels, so target her midsection. Perhaps if Franchon had, that would have wore on Alejandra's stamina. That would have caused her
Start fading.
punch resistance to wane as a result of her energy reserves waning. But as it stands, Franchon threw a lot of headshots. There was a lot of headhunting, and it was clear very early in this fight that Alejandra can take a punch to the face. It's her midsection where you need to go. It's her midsection that you need to work, because that's your best bet to slow her down. These are key points that Franchon and her team may want to be mindful of in what could be a second fight, because Franchon let it be known immediately after the match that she wants to run it back. She wants a rematch, and I think she deserves one. I think it was competitive enough that there's a precedence for it, and these may be the keys to achieving the victory that she was deprived of here. I want to say that it was a close competitive fight. It was definitely entertaining. Both combatants really put on a show. I think the crowd was pleased with the aesthetic of the fight, what they saw. But as I stated earlier, I'd have preferred a draw than a loss, because I'm just not sure that that's what happened. My eyes tell me another story. And I think that there's a precedence for a second fight. I think that needs to happen. We then come to what was the main event of that same card, the ascent of Jaime Munguia from the junior middleweight division to the middleweight division against seasoned veteran Gary Spike O'Sullivan. And much like the fight I just talked about here, I feel like one of the fighters made things harder on themselves than they needed to be. In this fight, you notice that Jaime Munguia was exhibiting many of the same characteristics he exhibited in the junior middleweight division, you know, throwing with bad intentions, loading up on shots, and it was the darndest thing because, you know, Jaime actually had more success with his straight shots as opposed to his bent arm punches, those hooks, that whenever he fired those hooks, it gave Spike an avenue of opportunity to get back in this fight, to counter those hooks. Whereas when Jaime fired off straight shots, punches that were flowing from the outside coming in, Spike looked all but ready to go. I mean, I could count at least 2 times, 2 to 3, where I felt like, you know, Jaime could have ended this fight a while ago. He could have put this guy away, but he let him off the hook, and it's because he went back to hooking as opposed to firing straight shots, simply going for speed as opposed to power, loading up on the shots and giving Spike that which he could counter. At 23 years old, I don't feel that Jaime exhibits the kind of ring savvy, ring IQ, and nuance of a Devin Haney, for example, or a Shakur Stevenson, other young fighters, other young champions of sorts. I don't feel that he has all the layers that they have, and I don't hold it against him. I'm just making the observation that Jaime still has room for a lot of growth, and he needs it because he's in the middleweight division now, and there are much tougher challenges out there than the likes of a Gary Spike O'Sullivan. I feel that in watching this, Jaime exhibited a lack of ring savvy, a lack of ring IQ, because if you see you're having more success with your straight punches, why don't you stick to firing those instead of hooking off with this guy? You're making it harder on yourself. To properly gauge Jaime Munguia's middleweight debut, I dissect it into 2 primary areas. One is implementation, what sweet science is actually being applied, the nuts and bolts of it, the fight mechanics, and physicality, what natural attributes and strengths he brings to the table as an athlete. Now, in the realm of physicality, there actually is a lot of virtue. Jaime showed good speed, good reflexes, good power, good punch resistance, because, at one point, Spike actually had him buzzed there. But, Jaime recovered. He dealt with the shot. His physical dimensions, the fact that this kid can really fill out because he's only 23 years old now. Yet look at his physical dimensions. He hasn't even come into his man's strength yet. He hasn't even peaked yet. So in the realm of physicality, there still seems to be a lot of promise associated with Jaime. But in the realm of implementation, what sweet science is being applied, well, that's where he needs improvement. And that's where he's always needed improvement. That his defense is still a bit leaky. He's winging these big shots that, a more educated puncher can counter. I mean, if Spike can counter your hooks, it's a safe bet that a Golovkin, that a Canelo, maybe even a Charlo could do a little better than Spike did.
Better be careful.
I still feel that Jaime has to focus on what he's good at and what strengths he has, and his strengths primarily really are out of the pressure fighter based style. I mean, that's what he's good for, that's what he's known for, and that works for him. But he should focus on that and refining it, staying off the center, fighting on a swivel as you bear down on your opponent so you don't take punishment coming through the front door, shortening up those hooks so there's not much room in there for you to get countered, developing a piston-like jab. And rest assured, we're not talking about some flick jab, some shake and bake jab geared towards keeping a guy out, rather a key that will help to get Jaime into his desired range. The speed and power he exhibited with his straight punches showed that that's going to warrant a lot of respect from most other fighters out there. He just needs to refine it. Let the punches flow. Don't load up on them. There's actually more power and more speed on them when you let the punches flow. I've said this before and I'll say it again. Everybody can't be everything, but you can be what you already are and be good at that. Be the best at that. And I happen to think that Jaime has the potential to be an elite level pressure fighter. So that's where the focus should be on, making him that elite level pressure fighter that stays off the center, fights on a swivel, shows good power, good speed, good punch resistance.
Oh, it does get through.
Can own the pocket and impose his will, impose his size on the other guy. That is where the refining needs to happen, because I don't happen to think that Jaime's going to turn into a boxer-puncher or a pure boxer or anything of the sort. I think a lot of time and energy would be wasted getting him away from the things he's already good at. I wonder who we'll see him in the ring against next, because he's still not a finished product, this kid. I reiterate, he doesn't show all the flash, pizzazz, ring savvy, and nuance of a Devin Haney or a Shakur Stevenson. So they've got to tread carefully moving forward, because they're in the middleweight division now, okay? This ain't junior middleweight. Ain't no juniors up here except for Chris Eubank Jr. So let's see what happens. Let's see the further development of Jaime Munguia. And what is other middleweight news per Mike Kopinger and his sources, Canelo Alvarez has zeroed in on Billy Joe Saunders as his May 2nd opponent, and negotiations are expected to pick up during the week toward consummating a deal. Saunders holds a 168-pound title, so a victory would make Canelo a full-fledged 4-division champion. I remember in late 2017, after Billy Joe Saunders had effectively outclassed David Lemieux in a fight that many people picked Billy to lose, and lose by way of knockout. How soon we forget that the going theory, the going trend was that David Lemieux was going to get Billy out of there. I remember when Billy outclassed that guy, that Eric Gomez, the president of Golden Boy Promotions, likened Billy Joe Saunders to the likes of an Arislandi Lara. He called Billy Joe Saunders a runner. You fast forward 2-3 years, and here we are. This is the front runner, pun intended, for Canelo Alvarez fight. I'll say that devoid of the conjecture, devoid of the anecdotes, devoid of the opinions, Billy Joe Saunders possesses a style that does not complement Canelo Alvarez's style, because Billy Joe Saunders is not a come-forward aggressor giving Canelo Alvarez that to which he can counter, that to which he can put those awesome counter-punching abilities to good use. That's not the kind of style that Billy has, because Billy himself is a counter-puncher. But he's not just a counter-puncher, he's a counter-puncher with a set of legs. This poses great difficulty for a guy like Canelo Alvarez, who might so rely on the other guy's work rate to give him opportunities, because Billy Joe Saunders is a counterpuncher, yeah, but he's not just a counterpuncher. He's a counterpuncher who can move.
And a southpaw.
He's fully capable of fighting a long-distance, outside kind of fight against what is the smaller fighter. I mean, I don't even know if you guys are aware of this, but Billy Joe Saunders is a naturally bigger guy in more ways than one than Canelo Alvarez. He's more statuesque, and he's got a naturally bigger build than Canelo Alvarez. The intrigue is that while Canelo Alvarez has added yet another layer to his game, you know, he is conventionally a boxer-puncher with an affinity for counterpunching, but he has added a pressure fighter kind of style that we have seen since the Golovkin rematch, to where he can fight on a swivel whilst coming forward to close the gap on his opponent. I think that Billy Joe Saunders possesses a particularly frustrating style for a guy like Canelo, regardless of what base style he decides to go with. A very similar principle to what I say about Demetrius Andrade.
They're frustrating.
These two kind of awkward, herky-jerky, outside counter-punching guys that can fight on the fly, they can be very frustrating guys to share the ring with. That's what Billy Joe Saunders is. And I expect that as an announcement looms, as we get closer to what could be Canelo versus Saunders, the usual suspects are going to try to diminish Billy Joe Saunders. They are. They're going to try to diminish Billy Joe Saunders in place of Jermall Charlo, who, like Billy Joe Saunders, is a two-division champion, though is lacking in terms of resume. I mean, did you guys forget? Billy Joe Saunders doesn't just have David Lemieux on his resume. He also has the former WBO champion, Andy Lee. He also gave Chris Eubank Jr. his first professional loss. That's the same Chris Eubank Jr. that they're trying to make Jermall Charlo fight here today. Is that the best they could do for you? Conjure up a guy that Billy Joe Saunders beat already? But I'm expecting, per usual, that the usual suspects will try to diminish Billy Joe Saunders as an opponent choice for Canelo because they're upset that Charlo can't get the fight.
Tough titty.
I'll tell you that Billy Joe Saunders is a stiffer test for Canelo Alvarez in his particular base styles, regardless which one he decides to use. He possesses a more frustrating style for a guy like Canelo to have to deal with, and that in and of itself makes him a stiffer test than Jermall Charlo, who's a decent boxer-puncher, though really hasn't proven much in the middleweight division. I mean, I know that Billy's not a middleweight anymore, but when he was there, he did face better guys than the guys that Jermall Charlo's been fighting.
Yeah, that's true.
So I'll say that I'm a proponent of the fight. I like the fight. So let's wait and see if this thing is really going down.